Coming up next, we have Craig Farlie. He's the managing director at Farlie Turner in Fort Lauderdale.
Chris, how are you?
Good. How are you, man?
Very well, thank you.
It's been forever since we've seen each other.
Been a long time.
Yeah, what, like a week?
At least.
We've seen each other far too many times this month. We were in New York City at the Beer Marketers Insights Conference together.
True.
We spent a weekend together running a 200-mile Ragnar relay race, getting really acquainted in a smelly van.
Filled with people and wet clothes.
It is nice to see you all cleaned up and out here in Santa Monica.
Thank you, likewise.
So want to talk to you a little bit about one of the deals that you were involved in this year as an advisor on the brewery deal. They're local here to Southern California. What can you talk to me, just to give us maybe a little peek behind the curtain at how that deal developed, how it evolved, and I guess ultimately why Patrick and the folks at the brewery wanted to find a private equity partner to carry them forward into the future.
Sure. So I think Patrick was like a lot of other breweries out there in the current environment, realizing that the environment is changing. It's becoming harder. It's getting more competitive. There's a lot of money that's entered the industry, and he didn't want to get left behind. So Patrick approached me, I guess about 18 months ago, and we sat down and talked about what various options were. Patrick had some ideas about what he didn't want to do, but he didn't really know who he wanted to partner with. He knew some people that he didn't want to partner with, but he didn't really know who would be the right fit. So we introduced him to a number of parties. Patrick was incredibly thoughtful about the process. He is a model client. Like if I ever wanted to, if you ever asked me to name a great client, Pat would be right at the top of the list because he takes advice well, but he's really very, very thoughtful and analytical about making decisions. And I think you see that in the quality of the beer that he's producing. It's not something that they're throwing together. It's something that's very, very thoughtful and aiming at a very certain high-end segment of the market.
Yeah, very methodical. I'll just throw it out there. I mean, it's probably his Santa Clara education where I went that makes him such a genius.
The Jesuits are very strong in that. I say as a Jesuit-educated person myself.
He has a really unique business model built around direct-to-consumer, and it was a big, I guess, consideration for the firm that ended up investing in the company. Can you talk to me just about how you see the direct-to-consumer marketplace evolving as more and more breweries start to look at that as a greater piece of their overall business?
I think it's a very, very interesting market, although, as you know, a lot of that is brand-dependent or state-dependent, depending on where you live. And so for Patrick, he had the good fortune to be in the state of California, which allows interstate shipments, intrastate, within the state of California. A lot of states aren't that fortunate, so the business environment favored him. And Pat ended up partnering with Castanea Partners out of Boston, who's a great private equity firm and a group that had a lot of experience, not necessarily in craft beer, but in luxury brands and in growing high-end brands. And so the combination of the two of them, I think, together will be very powerful because Patrick really does have a very unique business model. In a lot of ways, he's closer to a vineyard or a winery than he is to a lot of the typical craft beer businesses out there.
Absolutely. Now, he chose to take the private equity route. As you saw yesterday, as a lot of our viewers saw yesterday, there was a deal announced. Avery sold they're based in Colorado, Boulder. Avery Brewing sold a 30% stake to Mao San Miguel, which already has a 30% stake in Michigan's Founders Brewing. They obviously went the strategic route. And one of the comments that Adam actually made to me was that there's this notion that private equity is infiltrating the craft space, and he expressed some sort of trepidation and some concerns about that. Can you maybe talk about some of the misconceptions surrounding private equity and maybe some of their goals and objectives?
Sure. I think it's unfair to paint an entire group of people with a broad brush. So just like there are different approaches among strategics, and we've seen those play out, there are some that are considered craftier than others, if you will. There are different private equity groups, and the group that he ended up partnering with, I think during the course of the negotiations proved to Patrick they would end up being a good partner, and they were just simpatico. So, I've always said if you show me 100 different companies looking for a capital solution, you could end up with 100 different partners, because it's really at the end a very personal decision in terms of what is the owner looking to get out of it, and not in terms of capital, but what are the other elements? What is the personalities involved like? What are the expertise that they can bring to the table? So there are, there are obvious advantages to partnering with a large strategic, but that route is not for everyone, and that's not the route that Patrick chose.
There was a concern that Adam expressed that, the general goal of a private equity firm is to, accelerate growth and sell these companies, again, to make a profit, 5 to 7 years down the line. And one of the things that he said in his quote to me was that, who do you think is going to be best positioned to purchase these companies down the road? Well, it's going to be big beer. So the very same thing that, all of these brands are trying to avoid, which is ABI coming in and buying their brewery, they're probably going to end up with them anyways. Do you agree with that or not?
Yes and no. I mean, look, there is a long history of private equity selling to private equity. So in other words, private equity firms like Castaneus growing their investments and selling them to much larger private equity firms.
Sure.
So there's a history of that. Sure, sometimes they'll end up doing deals with strategics, and they won't be his forever partner. But to me, at the end of the day, it's a business. It's not a hobby, and you have to do the right things to help that business succeed. And so different people have different preferences or different things that are important to them. And I don't know what Pat's time frame is. Maybe it is the next 5 to 7 years where he wants to grow as much as he can, and then maybe he wants to do something else with his life. And I'm not speaking from any special knowledge. I'm just saying that, different people have the right to come to different conclusions. And I don't think you can automatically say that, well, if you sell to a private equity firm today, you're going to end up as part of Big Beer tomorrow, because, Big Beer may not be buyers in 5 to 7 years. They may have made their purchases already, and so there could be different outcomes.
Now, you were also involved in a deal with a strategic partner, Constellation. You helped work on the Funky Buddha deal that was announced this year as well. Can you talk to me about some of the motivations that the Funky Buddha guys had when they were looking for a partner, and why they ultimately wanted to partner with a company like Constellation, which they'll be speaking later today, but very well diversified. They're in wine, beer, spirits, and now marijuana. What did they like about Constellation?
The marijuana. No, I'm just kidding.
I mean, that's what
Casey
I like
and Ryan,
about
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
No, I think I don't want to speak for them, but I do think that, again, goes back to what are your goals or what are your preferences, and I think if you were to talk to Ryan back when he first had a dream about the brand, he wanted to see the brand become big, and I think both he and Casey had the smarts to realize that it was going to be very, very difficult on their own to grow that brand outside of Florida. Could they do it? Yeah, but would it be time-consuming, and would it take a long time, a lot of effort, and a lot of capital? Absolutely. And so I think they saw this as a way to not only jumpstart their growth, but to stay competitive in today's environment and build a really special brand that they can continue to be a part of. And they liked the fact that Constellation was willing to say, hey, listen, we have our diversified, spirits and wine business. In beer, we have this import, but really the only other asset that we own right now is Ballast Point. So, I mean, to be Funky Buddha is to be in a pretty special position to be with one of the fastest growing beer portfolios in the country with some of the top distributors and really give that brand a chance to grow.
Right. So we've talked about a few deals that have occurred this year. I think those are the more notable or marquee ones that obviously, Brooklyn has some deals as well that they announced with 21st Amendment and Funkworks. And there have been a few smaller deals, but in general, it seems like the activity has slowed. There haven't been as many blockbuster deals as there have been in years past. Where do you see just M&A going over the next 12 to 18 months in general?
That's a good question. I think they're going to continue to be deals. I think there'll be a little bit fewer and further between, and I think we're in a much more nuanced deal environment where brand is really important. So, my guess is that there are a lot more deals that are not happening and not being announced, that there are groups out there looking for capital to grow that maybe you're not getting done.
Why?
I think multiples have come down. I think that the strategics and the private equity firms out there have become a lot choosier about who they're looking to partner with, and the choices are becoming more difficult. When you could look at a 100,000 barrel acquisition and make yourself an immediate player in the industry, okay, well, let's jump on that.
Yeah.
Now all of a sudden, if it's slightly smaller than that, does this brand have the potential to grow? Can we make it into a regional? I don't think anyone's looking at making a brand into a national anymore, but I think people are being really choosy about the brands that they're getting in bed with. And then you look at growth is becoming more challenged. So all of those things, I think, will have the impact of maybe pulling back the amount and the speed of the acquisitions that we're going to see.
Yeah, I mean, it almost seems like the amount of investment needed to sort of buy in, if you will, to one of these brands, and the amount of investment that you're going to need behind that to help grow it. I would think that a lot of buyers are probably starting to rethink whether or not it's worth it.
Yeah, look, even for people outside of the industry, you pick up a newspaper or a magazine article today and you're not reading craft beer is growing, you're reading craft beer is struggling. Even though when you dig down or you peel back the layer of the onions, there are some brands that you and I both know very well that are growing very, very quickly. But the mainstream media, I won't call it fake news, but the big story out there is craft is struggling. It's not. It's only growing 5%.
Well, we're certainly guilty of that for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the headline, that's the top line number, and it's it is a lot of the larger, more established brands that are, I think, in that
searching
group.
for growth.
Yeah, they're the ones that are searching for the growth. There's a lot of stuff, like you said, peel back the layer of the onions. There's a lot of companies that are still growing. I'd love to talk about this stuff with you all day. We're out of time.
Over a beer.
Over a beer later today.
Thank you.
Thanks, Craig.
Yeah.
Cheers.